find yourself in the village of Atworth, walking along the A365 Bath Road in the direction of Bath, you'll see Bradford Road to the left just after Atworth's famous clock tower. Go down Bradford Road until just after the school you come to a fork with Church Street on the right. At the end of Church Street you'll find the Church of St Michael. Well, hello and welcome to this video, which is about that Church of St Michael in the village of Atworth in the English county of Wiltshire. Atworth, on the western borders of Wiltshire, has a population of about 1,400 residents and is both a civil and an ecclesiastical parish. Atworth parish is a key part of the benefice of Atworth with Shaw and Whitley, lying in the deanery of Bedford and Avon and the diocese of Salisbury. St Michael's is also known as St Michael and All Angels, and is the larger of the two churches in Atworth, the other being the independent church by the clock tower. The late Professor W.H. Dowdeswell, in his publication The Church of St Michael Atworth, A Short History, which he wrote in 1985, prefers the name St Michael's for the church, and so I've used that name here, although lots of people refer to it as St Michael and All Angels. Now, in some parts of the world, 100 years is a long time, but the history of St Michael's actually began more than 1,000 years ago. In fact, in the year 1001, the very first year of the second millennium. That's a very impressive thought indeed. In 1001, Elfrida, who's now known as Alfrida, it's just as well, newly appointed abbess of Shaftesbury, was granted control of Bradford and Avon by agreement of King Ethelred II. She began the building of several churches in the area to provide refuge and to hold relics of saints against the Vikings, although they had returned to the Isle of Wight. And so, towards the end of the year, 1001, Atworth's first church, in the form of a small chapel, was planned. This church was ready for its first use in about 1010 or 1020, and fully complete by 1070. It remained in use over the following 400 years or so. St Michael's acquired its first vicar in 1298, supported by the patron of the church, Richard Cottle, of Cottle's House. Cottle's House and its estate was eventually to become, and remains to this day, the home of Stonor School. After fire damage contributed to the general need for maintenance, the original church building was in a poor state by the end of the 14th century. And it was replaced in the mid-15th century by a new building, with the help of the then resident of Cottle's House, one Thomas Beauchamp. This second church had a tower and an original peal of 4 bells. The tower and its bells are the principal surviving remnant of the 1450 church. We'll discuss the tower and its bells further when we visit the tower. Some 400 years later still, by the first half of the 19th century, the condition and size of the church, in the face of a growing population, were cause for concern, and it was decided to demolish the Thomas Beauchamp church and rebuild it to a newer and larger design by R.E. Goodrich of Bath. The old 1453 tower was left in place, and the new third church on the site, built just to the south of the tower, linked to the ground floor room now constituting the vestry by a short passage. Actually, this practice of leaving towers in situ was quite common at that period, and is seen in St Nicholas Church, Winsley, near Bradford-on-Avon as well. About 50 years after the completion of the church, in about 1845, the present pews were provided and the altar was raised onto a stone platform. This is the building as it exists today. The cost of the third church was met largely by a grant from the Incorporated Society for promoting the enlargement, building and improving of churches and chapels. Externally, it is of plain dressed limestone, somewhat featureless but for the old gargoyles extending from the tower. The roof is of Welsh slate. Let us have a look at St Michael's churchyard. We enter the churchyard through the wrought iron gates, and we then immediately find ourselves in the avenue, which comprises some 36 yew trees. Two-thirds of the way along the avenue we pass alongside the old 1453 tower, situated on the north side of the main building and attached by the short corridor which leads from the nave to the vestry. We will visit St Michael's Tower properly later on. Finally, we approach the West End entrance. The church sits in quite a large churchyard next to a working farm. The churchyard is mainly occupied by a great many graves, as well as many sites of burials of ashes. Now, let us have a quick look at the churchyard from the northwest corner first. We'll pan through the West End and towards the south, when we'll see the neighbouring farm. After that, we'll move to the western aspect of the churchyard and start with a look to the north, when we'll see the old vicarage. While we do all that, we'll listen to a little more music. That rousing trumpet tune by Henry Purcell leads us to one of the most notable features of the churchyard, that is, the large example of a type of giant redwood tree known as a Wellingtonia giganteum. This English name for the giant sequoia refers to the Duke of Wellington, who had died a year before its introduction to England from the United States in 1853. The Duke's death was celebrated by the planting of a number of avenues of these trees. Although the St Michael's Wellingtonia, which is quite close to the boundary of the churchyard, leans somewhat to the south, it has been declared many times as being completely safe. It has been described as St Michael's lightning conductor. Finally, as far as our exploration of the outside of the church is concerned, you see here the flag of the English Diocese of Salisbury flying at the entrance gates to the churchyard. Now it is time for us to have a look at the features inside the church. The door has opened and seems to be inviting us in. We enter the church through this substantial door at the west end. We then have to pass under the gallery before entering the nave. The interior of the church resembles a rather typical chapel design prevalent in the 19th century. Indeed, it was at that time customarily known by local residents as the chapel. The nave is just about as wide as it is long, giving an airy and open feel to the space, with the acoustic being surprisingly bright for a small rural church. Immediately on entry to the nave, one becomes aware of the rather beautiful east window, designed by Hugh Easton, and which depicts a Galilean scene. The window was created in honour and memory of Mrs. Nora Forestier Walker, by her second marriage, who was the widow of Major Sir John Fuller. She lived at Cottle's House and was a significant benefactress of Atworth. She died in 1935. Hugh Easton produced many works in stained glass throughout the country, including windows in several cathedrals, perhaps the best known being that commemorating the Battle of Britain in Westminster Abbey. There is also at least one almost identical window to that of Atworth in the church of St John the Evangelist in Churt in Surrey, although naturally the dedication details differ. At the bottom of each of the three vertical divisions of the window is the dedication. On the left, bearing the name Nora Forestier Walker, in the centre, indicating that she was the widow of Sir John Fuller, and on the right, the coat of arms of the Fuller family. In front of the window, on the stone platform which constitutes the sanctuary and extends across the width of the church, is the stone altar. This was a gift of the St John's Ambulance Brigade in 1964, in memory of Lady Kathleen Fuller, who was the county nursing superintendent and the nursing cadet vice president for the St John's Ambulance. Its ornaments were given by the church members and by friends. The altar was originally placed directly against the east wall, but was moved in 1981 when the sanctuary was redesigned to conform to the requirements of the modern liturgy. The sanctuary on which the altar is situated is dedicated to the memory of Mrs. Florence Griffiths, the mother of the long-serving vicar, the Reverend Geoffrey Griffiths, and incumbent at the time of the redesign. Looking at the pulpit, it has been reported that the polygonal limestone pulpit with its traceried stone panels was transferred to St Michael's Church from the church of the same name in Melksham. There are 5 stone steps and a handrail that lead up to the pulpit. Here is the font. This octagonal bold stone font, which currently sits on the north side of the nave just to the west of the entrance to the vestry, was, according to at least one source, transferred from the first church, although another source dates it as being only from the 19th century. Apparently this position was occupied originally by a stove, at which time the font was beneath the gallery. Let us have a look at some of the plaques and tablets and other objects that are to be found on the walls of the nave. About halfway along the south wall of the nave, a board displays the long list of Atworth's clergy. As we mentioned earlier, the first vicar was appointed in 1298. It isn't clear why there was no such appointment until some 200 years after the completion of the church. Perhaps it was awaiting a patron, such as Richard Cotell. Richard Cotell sponsored the first vicar. Have a look and observe the predominance of French-styled names in the list, especially during the first 100 years or so. After that we observe the habit of Latinizing names, by changing, for example, Richard to Richardus. This practice was common at that time. For example, members of the Royal Society often recorded a Latin form of their name for membership. Thus, Isaac Newton often referred to his arch-academic enemy, Robert Hooke, as Robertus Hookius. Now, I've always had an interest in this practice because we did this at my old school. I was quite often referred to as Spencerus. However, returning to the list, note that in 1478, George Bucin has an anglicised name, just a few years after the benefaction of the second church by French-styled Thomas Beauchamp. The gap in the list between 1533 and 1754 is thought to be due to the loss of records in a fire at the Bishop's Palace in Bristol at the time of civil unrest relating to the Reform Bill in 1831. The records were in Bristol, apparently because Atworth had been ceded to the newly formed bishopric of Bristol in 1542, following the death of the last abbess of Shaftesbury, the rest of her diocese having transferred to Salisbury. Atworth was eventually reunited with the rest of the old Shaftesbury diocese in the Diocese of Salisbury, following the temporary abandonment of the Diocese of Bristol in 1836. Later, as we enter the 18th century, the names are of a much more modern idiom, with many displays of initials rather than full names. Now, let us examine the other plaques and memorials to be found around the nave. Whilst that is happening, I'll play for you Anton Rubinstein's Melody in F, not on Atworth's organ, but on the virtual pipe organ implementation of the Henry Willis organ of Salisbury Cathedral. St Michael's has a very impressive array of about 100 kneelers, all made by members of the congregation. Whilst we look at 80 of them, I'll play for you the Prière à Notre Dame from Leon Bowman's Suite Gothique on the virtual organ implementation of the Henry Willis organ in Hereford Cathedral. Our final section of this account of St Michael's Church in Atworth deals with the vestry, the organ, the tower and its bells. The vestry is actually formed by the ground floor of the tower. We enter the vestry via a door in the centre of the northern wall of the nave. It leads to a short passage connecting the nave to the tower. In the vestry, note the two bell ropes which arrive through the ceiling on each side of the vestry, having passed down through the upper chambers of the tower from the belfry, enabling the bells to be chimed. More on how that's done a little later. Also, in the vestry are stored the ceremonial robes. In the vestry there are several plaques present, some of which are almost illegible in places. One of them clearly commemorates the life of Surgeon Edward Tidcombe. So it's interesting to note that Atworth enjoyed the services of a resident medical doctor. Other persons celebrated on the various plaques include one Mary and John Abbott, a Charles Newman, Thomas Ailiff. Each of those latter two plaques are barely legible. A James and Mary Pierce, Elizabeth and Thomas Godwin of Ford Farm, with Mrs. Roberta Martin, sister of Thomas, and Abigail Godwin, a widow, and Mrs. Mary Lukerton, daughter of Thomas and Elizabeth Godwin. All of these names can be read. Let us now have a look at the organ. The first organ in St Michael's was installed in 1889, and it had just one manual. It was replaced in 1974 by the then incumbent, the Reverend Geoffrey Griffiths. He was a keen musician and a composer. About £2,000 was raised in the village for the purchase of a two-manual and pedals 1909 instrument built by John Compton. It was transferred from Leicestershire. Several ranks of pipes were added whilst it was in Atworth, and its two-manual console was replaced by one with three manuals. The new console was installed on the left of the altar, as the organ had an electric action and was thus able to operate remotely from the pipe case. That pipe case occupied most of the gallery. The present two-manual organ by Henry Speechley was obtained in 1997 from Cirencester Baptist Church, soon after the retirement of the Reverend Griffiths. It was aided by a generous contribution from Mr. and Mrs. Bernard Kane. This present organ has three divisions of organ pipes: the swell, the grate and the pedal, with 11 stops in total. First, the swell division is enclosed behind shutters, which, when closed, reduce its volume. It is played with the upper manual. I'll play each stop in turn so that you can recognise the different tonal characteristics. It can be coupled to the lower manual when maximum power is required. The swell has 4 stops. Next we come to the 6 stops of the grate division, played on the lower manual. Each stop on the two manual divisions has 54 pipes, one per key on the keyboard. The 10 manual stops thus have 54 times 10 equals 540 pipes. The pedal Borden 16-foot has 30 pipes, one per pedal key. Thus this small organ has 570 pipes in all. Let us now examine the tower of St Michael's and its bells. The tower was an important feature of the 1453, that is, the second church on the site. Although it was at the west end of the second church, as was and still is typical, it lies to the north of the present church. It's about 2/3 of the way up the nave from the west end. It is the principal remaining structure of the second church, having been left in place when the present 19th century church was constructed. The tower has 5 clear levels. The ground floor, which, as has already been mentioned, now constitutes the vestry. As well as a large external door on the west wall, there is a short passage which connects the ground level vestry to the nave, as has already been described. The 4 levels above that comprise 2 rooms, the belfry, and then a small loft immediately below a small gable roof. The enclosure of the stone spiral staircase with its gabled roof can be seen against the north wall of the tower, but as will be seen, the staircase rises only as far as the second floor room. Access above that is by internal ladders. Two key features are clearly visible on the eastern wall of the tower. The first marks the position of the roof of the old 1453 nave. This gives a good indication of the size and height of the old nave, and confirms that the second church would have been quite small for the increases in population within the village during the 19th century. The other feature is seen lower down, and is the outline of the old tower arch. This was the means whereby the tower was approached from the nave of the 1453 church. It is still present as an arch inside the tower, and we will see that shortly. The tower is a little unsafe today as far as climbing it is concerned, and so there are limits to what we can access. However, with care we can have a good look inside, so let's see what we can see. First, here is the door on the northern wall of the tower, which provides access to the staircase. The staircase is enclosed by a wall on the north of the tower, and as mentioned, we can see that this staircase does not go right to the top of the tower, only up to the second floor. Let us open the door to the tower and begin to climb the spiral staircase. First, we climb up behind the ground floor room, which is the present vestry, to reach the first floor room. Currently, it provides storage for a miscellany of various items. It's quite brightly lit in the day by the large leaded windows. Looking around, we see much more clearly the arch, which in the church of 1453 provided the link between the nave to its east and the tower to its west. The 2 bell ropes can also be clearly seen on their way down through the floor to the vestry. staircase to the second floor of the tower takes us to the upper limit of the stone staircase and to the room immediately beneath the belfry. We can see the door through which we entered this room, and when we look up to the ceiling of this room it also becomes clear that only a limited proportion of the original floor of the belfry is still in place. As the staircase goes no further up from here, other means are required to go any higher. Thus, a ladder provides a means of climbing to the belfry. However, given the state of both the ladder and the belfry floor, we will tread carefully and not actually enter the belfry. We are able to have quite a good look at the bells from the floor of this room, but it will be better to go some way up the ladder. Bell number 3, the tenor bell, can be seen clearly through the gaps in the belfry floor. Although the belfry now holds only 3 bells, in total 4 bells have been present at different times. One of the original bells was removed in 1533, although it's unclear why. But the full peal of bells is no longer heard owing to doubts about the safety of their mountings and the condition of bell number 1 in particular, the treble bell. However, today bell number 2 and the tenor bell, bell number 3, are rung before Sunday services. Normally, a bell is chimed by a rope which passes over a large bell wheel, which is then pulled and rotates the bell on its shaft, supported by gudgeons in 2 side bearings. Hence the clapper hits the sound bow to cause the bell to ring. Although St Michael's bells are reasonably secure in their headstocks, they cannot currently be chimed by turning on their gudgeons because the mountings of the gudgeons in the frame bearings are unsafe, and so instead ropes are attached directly to the clappers of these 2 bells, so that the clappers will strike the sound bows of their bell with no motion of the bells and their wheels. The tenor bell, which is the largest and the lowest in pitch, is in the southernmost position. It is dated 1606 and was made by Roger Purdue of Bristol. It is inscribed Gloria in excelsis Deo. The central bell was cast in Chewstoke, Somerset, in 1786 by William Bilby, and it is dedicated to the church warden William Webb, whose plaque was seen earlier. The treble bell, which is the smallest and highest in pitch, is in the northernmost position of the remaining 3 bells. It is said that it was cast in Bristol in about 1350. It is now considered to be dangerously cracked. This bell is reported to be the oldest surviving church bell in the county of Wiltshire. It carries the inscription Ave Maria. Well, there we have it. The Church of St Michael in Atworth. I do thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. All that remains is for me to provide the acknowledgements and to give you the full details of the music that you heard. Thank you.
you.